Welcome to Shadow Fear. Tonight we journey deep into the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, a land older than time, where shadows move on their own. And the mountains keep secrets no one should ever uncover, from ghostly lights haunting the rivers to ancient forces buried beneath the trails. You're about to hear 8 of the most disturbing, true Appalachia horror stories ever told. Each one will make you question what's real and what's waiting just beyond the firelight. But before we descend into the dark, most viewers make one terrifying mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing that, they miss the most chilling stories ever whispered in the dark. Don't let that be you. Hit subscribe now and join the circle of those brave enough to listen. So, where are you watching from? What time is it there? Drop it in the comments below, because here, the night never ends. Now, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's step into the darkness together. Story 1. I don't tell this story much anymore. The people who live around here, the locals, they have already heard versions of it passed down over campfires and barroom whispers. But this one's different, because I was there, and I don't think the version I lived was ever meant to be told. My name's Evan, and back in 2019, I took a seasonal job as a park ranger assistant in Randolph County, West Virginia. I was 24, restless and recently dumped, which made long hours in the woods seem like a good way to get away from everything. The Elk River Trail ran right through my assigned area. It was quiet, scenic, and, for the most part, forgotten by tourists. The first time I heard about the ghost lights, it was from Bill, one of the older rangers. He was a wiry man in his 60s who chewed tobacco like it was oxygen. One night after a late patrol, he said, "If you ever see blue lights floating over the water out here, Evan, you turn your ass around. Don't stop. Don't look. Just leave." He said it with the kind of tone that makes you think he isn't joking. I laughed, called it swamp gas or some kind of optical illusion. Bill just looked at me and said quietly, "That's what the last one said." The trail itself was about 12 miles long, cutting through forest that had grown thick and uneven over old mining land. There were still rusted rail lines half swallowed by moss, and if you looked close, you could see the remains of the flood that had wiped out the Elk River town in 1929. Stone foundations, a church bell, and somewhere beneath the silt, an entire community buried alive. During my first month, everything felt normal. I checked trail cameras, cleared fallen branches, helped a few lost hikers. It was peaceful, until mid-October when the nights got longer and the mist started rolling in thicker than usual. It began with sounds. Not animals, not wind, something else. Every night near the lower trail, I'd hear a faint humming, like someone running a generator far off in the woods. But there was nothing there, no campsite, no cabin, just river and trees. Then one evening, while I was closing up the trailhead parking lot, Megan, one of the volunteer guides, came running up the road in tears. She'd been leading a photography group and said she saw lights by the river. Her words came out in panicked bursts. They were floating over the water, like lanterns, but they moved against the wind. I tried to get a photo and my phone froze, like it literally locked up and started playing static. Bill took her seriously. He told me quietly to log the report but not to put it in the main system. "You'll just make the higher-ups think she's drunk," he said. I didn't argue, but something about that didn't sit right with me. A few days later, another hiker reported seeing something glowing near the riverbank at mile marker 7. I offered to check it out after my shift. Bill just said, "Don't be stupid, son." But of course I went anyway. It was a Thursday night. The air had that heavy stillness before a storm. I parked my truck at the southern entrance and hiked in with a flashlight and a handheld radio. The trees closed in quickly, swallowing the sound of the road behind me. Around mile marker 5, I started to notice something weird. The usual sounds of the forest were gone. No crickets, no owls, no wind, just silence. Then faintly a kind of whispering hum drifted from the direction of the river. I followed it through the brush until I reached the bank. That's when I saw them. Across the water, maybe 30 feet away, 3 pale blue orbs floated just above the surface. They glowed softly, like lanterns under fog. They moved slowly, weaving in and out of each other. For a few seconds, I just stood there, staring. I remember thinking, this is beautiful. Then one of them flickered and turned toward me. It's hard to explain what I mean by that. The light didn't move physically. It just felt like it was looking right at me. My chest went cold. The other 2 followed, facing my direction. The humming sound grew louder, almost like a vibration inside my head. I took a step back, and that's when the ground under my boot cracked. The dirt gave way and I stumbled, dropping my flashlight. When I picked it up, the lights were gone. But the humming wasn't. It was closer now, behind me. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. There was nothing there. Then faintly I saw something move between the trunks, a flicker of blue like the reflection of light off wet skin. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Anyone out there?" Silence. Then from the radio on my belt, a burst of static and a voice. At first I thought it was Bill, but it wasn't. "Don't look at the lights." They looked back. I froze. The voice was distorted but familiar. My heart stopped when I realized who it sounded like. Tom Weller, a ranger who had disappeared 5 years earlier. His truck had been found near the same stretch of trail, still idling, radio on, and no trace of him since. The humming grew into a deep vibration, shaking the ground. I looked up and saw something rising from the river. It wasn't a person. It was a shape, tall and thin, its outline flickering blue like heat lightning. I couldn't make out a face, but I could feel it staring at me. The air around me thickened, heavy like water. My ears popped. My flashlight sputtered and died. I ran. Branches tore at my arms, my boots slipped in the mud. But I didn't stop until I saw the faint orange glow of the parking lot lights through the trees. I practically dove into my truck, started the engine, and peeled out. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I swear to God I saw one faint blue light hovering in the middle of the road. I called Bill as soon as I got home. He answered on the first ring, said, "You went down there, didn't you?" I told him everything. There was a long pause, and then he sighed. "I told you not to look," he said. "That's how it starts." The next day I went back to the site with another ranger, Derek. We found footprints, mine, but there was something else too. Drag marks in the mud leading straight into the water. They looked old, maybe from an animal, maybe not. We didn't talk much on the hike back. Later that night, as I was writing my report, I noticed something odd on my radio. The battery indicator showed full, but the static wouldn't stop. Just a low, steady hum, like the sound I'd heard on the trail. Then for a second it went silent, and through the silence I heard it again. Tom's voice, faint, broken. "It's not the lights. It's what's inside them." I quit the job 2 weeks later. Bill didn't try to stop me. Before I left, he handed me a small envelope. Inside was an old Polaroid dated 1989. It showed the river dark and calm with 3 faint blue orbs hovering above it. On the back in shaky handwriting were 3 words: "Don't follow them." I moved back to Ohio and tried to forget. For a while I almost did. But sometimes, especially when I'm driving at night, I catch glimpses of blue in the rearview mirror. Just for a second. Then it's gone. Last month I got a call from Derek. He said the department shut down the southern section of the trail again. Another disappearance. A hiker named Paula Jeffers went missing near the river. The only thing they found was her camera. The last photo she took was timestamped 12:43 a.m. It shows the river at night, moonlight on the water, and 3 glowing blue orbs floating just above the surface. If you ever find yourself on the Elk River Trail, and the night gets too quiet, don't look toward the water, don't listen to the humming, and whatever you do, don't follow the lights, because once they notice you, they don't forget. Story 2. I used to think ghost stories were just that. Stories. You grow up hearing them from old folks, you laugh, you roll your eyes, and you move on. But after what happened to me on the Devil's Backbone Trail last spring, I can't laugh anymore. I don't talk about it much, but every so often when I drive past the ridge and see the fog hanging low over the trees, I hear her again. That sound. That crying. My name's Caleb, and I've been hiking for as long as I can remember. I live in southern Virginia, near the Appalachian foothills, and the Devil's Backbone Ridge has always been one of my favorite places to clear my head. The view is unreal. Miles of rolling green mountains that disappear into mist. But it's also earned a reputation over the years. People say it's cursed. The story goes that back in the 1960s, a church group took a weekend hike up there. It was mostly families and kids. A storm came through. Thick fog rolled in, and one of the kids and a little girl named Emily Warren got separated from the group. They searched for days but never found her. Just her tiny red jacket, caught in the branches below the overlook. Since then, hikers have claimed to hear a child crying up there at night. Some say if you follow the sound, you'll find small footprints leading toward the cliff's edge. Others say the crying stops right behind you. I never believed any of that. Until the night I decided to hike the trail alone. It was early April, right before the tourist season started. I had the day off work and I figured I'd camp out for a night on the ridge. I told my girlfriend Lena where I was going and promised to text her once I set up camp. The weather was decent, a little chilly but clear skies. The first few miles were easy. The trail wound through thick pine and laurel before climbing to the ridgeline. The higher I got, the quieter it became. It's strange. In the Appalachians, even when it's peaceful, there's always some noise, birds, crickets, wind in the leaves. But that day, once I hit the halfway point, it was like someone had turned the volume all the way down. Just me and the crunch of my boots. I made camp at an old lookout spot about 50 yards off the main trail. There's a wooden bench up there and a rusted sign that says Devil's Backbone Overlook. The name comes from the way the rocks twist out of the ground, jagged and uneven like a spine. The view that night was breathtaking. The valley below was covered in a blanket of fog, and the moonlight gave everything a pale, silvery glow. I ate dinner, checked my phone, no signal of course, and settled into my tent around 9. That's when I first heard it. It started faint, like the sound of a child crying somewhere far off in the woods. It was soft, uneven, almost like someone trying to hold back sobs. At first I thought it might be an animal. Foxes can make noises that sound weirdly human and raccoons can scream like babies. But the more I listened, the more certain I became that this was no animal. It sounded human. I unzipped my tent and shined my flashlight toward the trail. The sound stopped immediately. Silence. I waited a minute, shrugged it off, and zipped the tent back up. Probably my imagination. The wind does weird things up there. But about 20 minutes later it started again, this time closer. The crying was clearer now. High-pitched. Fragile. Definitely a little girl. I grabbed my light and stepped out again, calling out, "Hello? Are you okay? Do you need help?" Nothing. Then faintly from somewhere down the trail I heard it again. A soft, shaky voice. "Help me." Every instinct in me said to go back into my tent, but something about that voice, something desperate, made me move. I followed the trail with my light cutting through the fog, calling out every few steps. "Hey, where are you?" "It's okay, I can help you." The crying grew louder as I approached a curve in the path. Then I saw them, footprints. Small ones, bare, the kind a child would make. They led off the trail into the grass and toward the ridge. That's when I started to get uneasy. The ground was freezing cold. There's no way a barefoot kid could be walking around out here at night. Still, I kept moving, following the prints as the crying grew softer again, almost like it was trying to lead me somewhere. The footprints ended at the overlook, right at the cliff's edge. I stopped a few feet short, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The fog below the ridge was thick, so thick I couldn't see anything beyond a few feet down. The crying had stopped, and I heard a whisper right behind me, "Please, help me." I spun around, my heart slamming in my chest. The beam of my flashlight cut through the fog, but there was no one there. I started backing up toward the trail when something brushed against my arm. I whipped the light toward it and froze. Standing just a few feet away was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress, white or maybe pale yellow, soaked and muddy at the hem. Her hair was tangled, her skin looked almost gray in the moonlight, and her eyes, God, her eyes were too dark, like the pupils swallowed everything else. I wanted to say something, but my throat locked up. She looked up at me with this hollow expression and whispered, "It hurts." Then she turned and started walking toward the cliff. I lunged forward instinctively, shouting, "Wait, stop," but when I reached her, she was gone, no sound, no trace. Just empty air and fog swirling where she'd been standing. And then out of nowhere I felt a cold hand grab my shoulder from behind. I screamed and swung my flashlight around. No one there. The hand was gone. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. That's when the whisper came again, this time right next to my ear. "Don't look down." I froze. I don't know why, but I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. The air felt heavy, electric, like the moment before a lightning strike. Then, from the fog below, I heard laughter, childlike giggling. And just faintly beneath the laughter, the sound of something sliding down the rock face like nails or fingertips scraping stone. That broke me. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my tent, grabbed my pack, and bolted down the trail without even bothering to roll up my gear. Every step felt like something was right behind me. Once, I swear I heard small footsteps echoing mine. When I finally reached the parking lot, my truck was the only vehicle there. The air felt different and lighter somehow. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove straight home. When I got home, it was 3:17 a.m. I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes trying to calm down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I texted Lena, just said, "Home. We'll explain tomorrow." The next morning, I told her everything. She didn't laugh or call me crazy. She just stared at me for a while, then asked, "Are you sure it wasn't a dream?" I wasn't. I hadn't slept much that night. Maybe I imagined it all. Maybe I was tired and jumpy and mistook shadows for something else. That's what I tried to tell myself. But when I went to clean my hiking boots, I noticed something stuck in the treads. A thin red thread, like from a child's jacket. I threw the boots away that same day. A week later, I went back to the ranger station to report what I'd seen. The ranger on duty, an older woman named Denise, didn't look surprised. "You saw her, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I hesitated. "The girl?" She nodded. "We get a few of you every year, usually early spring or late fall. You hear crying, go off the trail, find footprints. Always ends the same. Right at the overlook. Who is she?" I asked. Denise leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. Name was Emily, 7 years old. Got lost up there in '63. Fog rolled in, group couldn't find her. Next day they found her doll and one shoe near the edge. Locals searched for a week. Never found her body. I told her about the whisper on "Don't Look Down." Her face went pale. That's what her brother said the day they found the doll. He swore he heard her voice say those exact words right before he nearly fell off the cliff himself. I thanked her and left. I told myself I'd never go back there again. But of course, curiosity has a way of eating at you. That summer, I was driving back from visiting my parents and decided to take the long way home. The road passed right by the Devil's Backbone trailhead. It was dusk, fog already starting to form. I don't know why I did it. I pulled over. Just for a minute, I told myself. I stood by the sign, listening. Nothing but the soft rustle of trees. The ridge was hidden in fog, silent and calm. Then faintly, so faint I thought I imagined it, I heard crying, not far away. I got back in my car, slammed the door, and drove off without looking back. But as I pulled onto the highway, my phone lit up. It was a text notification, no number. Just one message, "Please, help me." I stared at it until it disappeared. When I checked my phone's message history, there was nothing there. No record of the text. That was almost a year ago. I still have nightmares about that voice. Sometimes when it rains, I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear a child sobbing outside my window. I've talked to other hikers since then. Some say they've heard her too. A few claim to have seen the footprints. One man even swore he found a little red jacket hanging from a tree near the ridge. They say she cries because she doesn't know she's dead. That she's still trying to find her way back to the group. But others say something darker. That the crying isn't her at all. It's something that wears her voice. Something that lures people to the edge when the fog gets thick. Whatever it is, I know what I heard. So if you ever find yourself hiking the Devil's Backbone Trail and you hear a child crying somewhere ahead, don't go looking for her. Don't follow the footprints, because once you do, you might hear her whisper too, right behind you. Story 3. They say there's a rule in the Appalachian Mountains. If you hear whistling after dark, don't answer. It sounds like an old wives' tale, the kind of thing told around a campfire to spook kids. But anyone who's spent real time in those woods knows better. The mountains remember everything, and sometimes they call back. My name's Luke Harris, and I used to think that story was just local superstition, a weird bit of folklore. But after what happened to my brother Danny and me in the fall of 1983, I'll never laugh at mountain stories again, not after what I saw, not after what I heard. This isn't a ghost story, not exactly. It's more like something old, something that listens, something that mimics. And I think it's still out there, still waiting for someone to whistle back. Back in the early 80s, my brother and I lived in Fayette County, West Virginia, not far from the New River Gorge. We'd grown up hunting and camping all over those woods. Danny was a few years older, louder, bolder. the kind of guy who loved proving people wrong. That October, we decided to spend a weekend camping near the Gorge Trail, not far from an old rail bridge that crossed the water. It was isolated, quiet, the kind of place no one really went anymore since the old mine shut down. We'd both been stressed. I was dealing with a messy breakup and Danny had just been laid off. So we packed up our gear, grabbed a case of beer and headed out on a Friday afternoon, planning to fish and camp for a few nights. It was perfect hiking weather, cool but not cold, sky clear as glass. The trail wound through thick pine and maple, all glowing orange and gold with autumn. We set up camp near a bend in the river, right by an old fire pit someone else had left behind. That night, after a few beers and a lot of brotherly trash talk, the forest went still. I mean, completely silent. You don't notice how loud the woods usually are until they're not. No crickets, no owls. Nothing but the crackle of the fire. Then from somewhere up the trail we heard it. A long, low whistle. It wasn't a tune, not at first. Just a single note drawn out like someone testing to see if anyone was listening. It echoed through the trees, soft but clear. Danny looked up from his beer and grinned. "Probably some hiker screwing with us," he said. But it didn't sound like a person. There was something strange about it. The way it carried, like it was right there 1 second and a mile away the next. I shrugged it off, but a few minutes later it came again, this time closer. Still that same single note. Danny smirked, grabbed his flashlight, and stood up. "Let's return the favor," he said, then puckered his lips and whistled back. "Don't," I told him. "You'll just draw them in," he laughed. "That's the point, little brother." A few seconds passed. Then from deep in the woods the same whistle answered, only this time it matched Danny's exactly. Same pitch, same tone, same rhythm. That wiped the grin off his face. For a long moment neither of us moved. The fire popped, throwing sparks into the dark. Then Danny shrugged it off and sat back down. "Probably an echo," he said, but his voice didn't sound convincing. We tried to go back to talking, but the woods felt wrong, heavier somehow. I kept glancing toward the tree line, half expecting to see someone standing there. Eventually we turned in for the night. Around 3 a.m. I woke up to the sound of whistling again. It was faint, coming from just beyond the tent. Not an echo, not distant. Someone or something was right outside. I held my breath and listened. The tune was slow now, almost like a lullaby. I could hear Danny's breathing beside me, steady and deep. I whispered, "Danny?" No response. The whistling stopped. Then in a voice that sounded exactly like Danny's, I heard someone say from outside the tent, "Hey, Luke, you awake?" My blood ran cold, because I could see my brother's silhouette inside the tent, still asleep next to me. I didn't move, didn't breathe. After a few seconds, the voice outside repeated, softer this time. "Luke?" Then came the whistle again, low and mocking. I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the roof of the tent, too afraid to move. Eventually exhaustion won, and I must have drifted off because when I woke up, the sun was up and Danny was gone. At first, I thought he'd gone to get water or take a leak, but his pack was still there and his boots were gone. I called out his name a few times, nothing. The woods were dead quiet again. Then I saw the footprints. They led away from camp toward the riverbank. I followed them for about 50 yards before they just stopped. No sign of struggle, no slide marks, nothing. Just gone. I spent the rest of the morning searching, yelling his name until my throat hurt. By afternoon, I hiked back to my truck and drove straight to the ranger station. They called in a search team that evening. For 3 days, volunteers combed the woods, dogs sniffed the area, and divers went into the river. They found nothing. No tracks, no body, no sign he'd fallen or been dragged. It was like he'd walked off the face of the earth. On the 4th day, they found something. His flashlight, half buried in the mud near the tree line about a mile from our camp. It still worked, but the bulb flickered and there was a faint whistle when it turned on, like a high-pitched feedback tone. The ranger told me it was just the battery, but I didn't believe him. I stayed until they officially called off the search. Then I packed up what was left of our camp and went home. The first night back, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I got up to get a drink and caught myself staring out the kitchen window at the dark woods behind our house. And then I heard it. That same whistle. Long, low, distant. It came from the tree line. I froze. My hands went numb. I told myself it was my imagination. A trick of the wind. anything but what I knew it was. Then it came again, closer this time, and I realized it was coming from inside the house. I spun around, heart racing, and saw movement in the hallway, just a shadow, slipping out of view toward my bedroom. I grabbed a knife from the counter and crept forward, every step feeling heavier than the last. The house was silent. My bedroom door was half open, and then, from the darkness inside, I heard it. A voice. My brother's voice. "Luke, are you awake?" My stomach dropped. I backed away slowly, shaking my head. "Danny?" I whispered, even though I already knew. Something moved in the dark and slow, deliberate. I flicked the light switch. The room was empty. The window was open. A cold breeze drifted in, carrying a faint whistle with it. After that night, it kept happening. Every night at exactly 3:11 a.m., I'd wake up and hear the whistling. Sometimes faint, sometimes right outside the window. A few times I heard footsteps in the hall, soft and uneven. I tried everything. Music, sleeping pills, even moving to a new apartment across town. But it followed me. Always the same sound, always the same time. Once, in pure desperation, I decided to record it. I set up an old cassette recorder beside my bed and let it run overnight. The next morning I hit play. At first it was just static. Then faintly the whistling started. But underneath it, there was something else. Breathing. Slow. Wet. Labored. And then a voice whispered through the static, "It's cold down here." "Luke." I threw the recorder away that day. Over the years I learned to live with it. I got used to the lack of sleep, the whispers, the way my lights sometimes flickered at exactly 3:11. It became background noise, like the creaks of an old house. But sometimes when I let my guard down, it still finds a way to remind me it's not over. A few months ago, I was driving through Fayette County again for the first time in decades. I hadn't planned it, just took a wrong turn and ended up near the Gorge Trail. I pulled over for gas at this little roadside station. The clerk was a gray-haired guy who looked like he'd been there forever. When he saw my last name on my credit card, he said, "Harris, you any kin to that boy went missing out by the gorge back in '83? My stomach dropped. I nodded. "Yeah, he was my brother." The man frowned. "You ought to stay away from that place. Folks still hear the whistling sometimes. Couple years back, a kid from Beckley went missing out there. Same trail. They found his backpack by the river. His radio was still on. He looked me dead in the eye and said, 'That thing doesn't forget who talks to it.' I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I drove up to the overlook. I don't know why. Maybe closure. Maybe guilt. The woods were quiet, the river below glittering in the afternoon sun. For the first time in years, I almost felt at peace. Until I noticed something carved into the guardrail. Faded but still visible. "It's me, Luke." The air went cold. The woods went still, and then, faint, carried on the wind, almost came that whistle. Long, low, familiar. I backed away slowly, got in my truck, and drove until the trees disappeared in my rearview mirror. That was 3 months ago. I haven't been back since. But every night I still wake up at exactly 3:11, and lately, the whistling sounds closer. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I think I hear breathing too. If you ever find yourself walking the trails near the New River Gorge after dark, and you hear someone whistling in the trees, and don't answer, don't whistle back because it listens, and once it learns your tune, it never forgets. Story 4. Have you ever heard a story that sounds so ridiculous you can't help but laugh it off, until you see something that makes you realize it wasn't a story at all? That's what happened to me in 2016, deep in the Allegheny Mountains. It started as a hunting trip with 2 friends. It ended with one of them missing, and a memory I can't scrub from my mind no matter how hard I try. The locals around Elkins, West Virginia, have a saying, "If the cabin moves, you don't." I used to think it was some mountain joke about storms or flooding, but the old-timers weren't kidding, because up there in those woods there's a cabin that doesn't stay in one place. It was late November, a week before deer season. My buddies Rick and Mason wanted to scout a few miles of ridge before the first snow hit. I'd grown up hunting those same hills, so I figured, sure, one more trip before winter couldn't hurt. We loaded up Mason's truck, packed 3 days' worth of supplies, and drove out early Friday morning. The trail we followed wound through dense spruce and laurel, barely wide enough for a truck. We reached a clearing around noon and parked. From there, we hiked another 3 miles uphill to an old ranger path that cut through the ridge. By the time we made camp, the light was already fading. The temperature dropped fast, mountain nights always do. We were setting up when Rick pointed across the valley and said, "You see that?" I followed his gaze. Way down the slope, half hidden by trees, was a cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney. A single light glowed faintly in one of the windows. "That can't be right," Mason muttered. "There's nothing down there for miles." We hadn't seen another vehicle on the logging road all day. No signs of habitation, no mailboxes, nothing. Just forest. "Maybe an old hunting shack," I said, but even as I said it, something about the cabin felt off. It looked too clean, too well kept. Rick grinned. "Let's check it out in the morning." Mason didn't look thrilled, but we all agreed to head down at first light. It rained that night. Hard. The kind of rain that rattles the tent and soaks through the seams. By morning, everything was slick and gray. Fog hugged the trees, thick as smoke. We packed light and started down the ridge, following a deer path toward where we'd seen the cabin. The forest felt different, heavier somehow. The air smelled like wet wood and iron. After about an hour, we reached the bottom of the slope. The trees opened up into a small clearing, and there it was, the cabin, but it wasn't where we'd seen it before. Last night, it looked maybe half a mile north. Now it was sitting in a hollow we could have sworn was empty on the way up. "Must have misjudged the distance," Rick said, though his voice didn't sound convinced. Up close, the cabin looked old but sturdy. Rough timber walls, a tin roof, and a stone chimney puffing out the faintest trace of smoke. The door hung slightly open. "Maybe someone's in there," Mason said. "We should call out first." "Hello?" Rick shouted. "Anybody home?" No answer. He shrugged and pushed the door open. Inside, the place looked like something out of a postcard. Fire crackling in the stone hearth. Wooden table set with 3 tin cups. Lantern on the shelf still burning. "Someone's been here recently," I said. "Yeah," Mason replied. "But where are they?" That's when I noticed something strange. Dust. A thick layer of it, covering everything except the cups and the floor near the fireplace. And there were footprints, 3 sets of them leading from the door to the hearth. Ours. Except they were already there before we walked in. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe some other hunters had been through recently. But the fire was too perfect, too alive. There was no smell of smoke outside when we approached. No fresh wood pile. Mason was clearly uneasy. "Let's not mess with it," he said. "We can tell the ranger on the way back." Rick, being Rick, grinned and sat down at the table. "What's the harm?" "Warm fire, dry place, beats sitting in a wet tent." He reached for one of the cups. That's when we all heard it, from somewhere behind the cabin. 3 short knocks, not on the door. On the wall, we froze. Rick called out again. "Hey, we're just passing through." "You all right out there?" No response. Then the knocking came again, this time closer, heavier, like someone dragging their hand across the outer wall as they circled the cabin. Mason whispered, "Let's go." We backed out slowly, listening. The sound followed us to the tree line, then stopped. When we turned around to look back, the cabin door was closed. We hiked back uphill in silence. None of us said much that night around the fire. At one point, Mason muttered, "That place wasn't right." Rick chuckled nervously. "You just spooked yourself, man." But I could tell he didn't believe it either. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of someone moving outside. Soft footsteps circling our camp. I nudged Rick awake. "You hear that?" He frowned, listening. Then came a low creak. Like a door hinge, we both sat up. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke. I crawled out of the tent. Down the ridge, maybe 200 yards away through the fog, I could see it. The cabin. It was standing there just beyond the tree line, faint firelight flickering through the window. The only problem was, we were on higher ground now. The cabin couldn't have been there. The slope was too steep, too far from where we'd seen it earlier. Mason came out next, eyes wide. "That's impossible," he whispered. Rick grabbed his rifle. "I'm going to see who's screwing with us." He started toward the light before we could stop him. "Rick, don't!" I shouted. "Just leave it." He turned back and grinned. "It's just some backwoods prank, man." And then he walked straight into the fog. We waited. 10 minutes, 20. No sign of him. Then faintly, we heard whistling. A slow, tuneless whistle drifting from down the ridge. It didn't sound like Rick. It was too steady, too calm. Mason was pale as paper. "That's not him," he whispered. I grabbed my flashlight and started after it anyway. I couldn't just leave him out there. The trail twisted through the trees until the fog grew so thick I could barely see my feet. Then I saw it again, the cabin. Same one, same warm glow. The door stood open, and from inside came that soft, steady whistling. "Rick?" I called out. The whistling stopped. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing in the doorway. A shape, tall, still, backlit by the fire. Then the light flickered and went out. When my flashlight caught the doorway again, the cabin was empty. I turned to run and nearly fell backward. The forest was gone. The cabin now stood in a clearing I didn't recognize, and behind me, the ridge wasn't there anymore. It was like the woods had rearranged themselves. I ran anyway, crashing through trees until my lungs burned. Eventually, I stumbled back into our campsite, shaking and gasping. Mason was gone. Only our tent remained, half-collapsed, rain-slick, empty, and from somewhere deep in the fog behind me came that same soft whistle. By morning, the fog lifted. The cabin was gone. Search and rescue came 3 days later. They found my tent, my rifle, and nothing else. No footprints, no drag marks, no trace of my friends. When I told them about the cabin, they exchanged looks like they'd heard it before. One ranger, an older guy named Don, pulled me aside after the interview. He said quietly, "You're not crazy. We get reports like yours every few years. The cabin shows up where it shouldn't, folks go missing. We will never find the place again after." He paused, then added, "If you ever see it again, don't go near it. It still doesn't stay still long." I didn't know what he meant until a week later, when I drove home through the valley. There, through the trees off the logging road, I saw it again. The same cabin. This time, it was less than 50 yards from the road. Smoke rose from the chimney. The front door was open, and from inside, clear as day, I heard Rick's voice call out, "Caleb, over here. It's warm." "Yeah, my name's Caleb. I never told you that, did I?" I slammed the gas pedal and didn't stop driving until I hit the main highway. It's been years since then. But sometimes, especially when it rains, I swear I still smell that wood smoke. A couple months ago, a new hunting buddy of mine mentioned a strange little cabin he'd seen near Cheat Mountain, miles away from where I'd last spotted it. He said it looked brand new with a light burning inside. I told him not to go back. He laughed and said, "Why, you think it's haunted?" I didn't answer. Last week, he stopped showing up to work. His wife said he went up to his usual spot for the weekend and never came home. They found his truck at the trailhead. Keys still in the ignition. The only thing missing was his rifle. When the search team went out, they found footprints in the mud. 3 sets, 1 large, 2 smaller, leading off the trail. They ended at a patch of flattened grass, but no cabin, no debris, nothing. The strangest part? The prints weren't side by side, they were overlapping, perfectly matched. Like 3 people walking in the exact same steps. I don't hunt anymore. Don't hike much either. The woods don't feel the same. But last night, around midnight, I woke up to the faintest smell of burning pine. And when I looked out my window, I swear I saw a small orange glow at the edge of the tree line behind my house. A cabin. Same shape. The same soft light flickering in the window, and then I heard it again. Rick's voice carried on the wind. "Caleb, come on in. It's warm. If you ever find yourself deep in the Alleghenies and stumble across a cabin that doesn't seem to belong, walk away. Don't look inside. Don't listen to the voice calling your name, because it's not your friend waiting for you, and once you see it, it knows you." Story 5. I grew up in Logan County, West Virginia, where coal dust settles into everything. Your clothes, your lungs, your memories. My granddad used to say the mines were like living things. They breathed when you did, and when they stopped breathing, so did you. I never really understood what he meant until last fall, when I went hiking near the old Warrenton mine shaft, the one that collapsed back in '57. If you're not from here, you probably don't know the story. That collapse buried 42 miners alive. The company couldn't get to them. Too unstable, they said, so they sealed the shaft and walked away, leaving the men entombed down there. There was a memorial put up later, a rusted plaque and a fence, but most locals avoid it. Some claim they still hear sounds from below, metal clinking, distant voices, coughing. But what nobody tells you What I learned the hard way is that those sounds don't come from underground anymore. They come from the woods above. It started on a random Saturday in September. I'd been back home for a few months after losing my job in Charleston. I was 32, directionless and restless. So I did what I always do when I need to clear my head. I went hiking. The Warrenton Ridge Trail cuts through dense pine and shale and eventually runs right past the old sealed mine. My mom had begged me not to go near it. "That ground's cursed," she said. "The mountain remembers." I laughed it off, thinking it was just her way of keeping me out of trouble. The trail was quiet that day, unnaturally so. It was late afternoon, and the light filtered through the trees in long golden beams. I remember thinking how still it felt. No birds, no wind, just me and the crunch of gravel under my boots. When I reached the old mining site, the air changed. It smelled faintly metallic, like rust and ozone, the way the air smells right before lightning. The entrance was still sealed with a thick steel gate welded shut and covered in no trespassing signs. There was also a weathered wooden cross stuck in the ground with a faded wreath hanging from it. I stood there a while listening. The silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. Then just as I turned to leave, I heard it. Clink. It was faint, distant, like someone tapping a metal rod against stone. At first I thought it was an echo from somewhere deeper in the ridge, but the sound came again. Clink. 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 Steady. Rhythmic. And it wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from the trees behind me. I froze. The hair on my neck stood up. The tapping grew louder, joined by another sound, shuffling like boots dragging through dirt. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the still air. "Anyone out there?" Nothing. Then faintly I heard coughing. It was dry and ragged, like someone choking on dust. I turned my flashlight toward the tree line, sweeping the beam slowly. Between the trunks, something moved. Just a shadow at first, tall and thin. It stepped behind a tree before I could focus on it. I told myself it was a deer or maybe another hiker. I didn't believe it, but I wanted to. The sun was going down fast, and I didn't want to be up there after dark. So I started back toward the trailhead, walking fast but trying not to run. Then the air got colder, not gradually, instantly. My breath came out in white clouds, even though it had been nearly 70 degrees that day. The metal clinking started again, this time right beside me. It wasn't echoing anymore. It was following me. By the time I reached the clearing near the ridge, it was full dark. The moon hadn't risen yet, and the woods were a black wall around me. I could still hear the faint dragging step somewhere behind me, keeping pace. Then I smelled something. Coal smoke. Old and sharp like burnt oil and dust. I looked up the ridge and saw a faint orange glow flickering through the trees like the reflection of fire. I don't know why I went towards it. Curiosity, maybe. Or maybe something else, like I wasn't entirely in control anymore. The glow led me to an old ventilation shaft I'd never seen before. It was half buried in the hillside, framed by rotting timbers. The light came from inside, faint, pulsing. When I leaned closer, I realized it wasn't firelight. It was a lantern. A hand was holding it. The skin was black with soot, the nails cracked, the knuckles raw. The lantern swung slowly, casting light on a figure crouched inside the tunnel. His face was gray, his eyes dull and sunken like glass marbles. He wore an old miner's helmet with a broken lamp, and his mouth hung slightly open as if frozen mid-breath. He looked right at me. I stumbled back, heart hammering. "Jesus Christ, are you okay?" The figure didn't move. Then very slowly he raised the lantern higher and said in a voice like gravel scraping metal, "You're late for shift." Then he smiled. His teeth were black. The lantern flickered and went out. I bolted. I don't remember the next few minutes clearly, just running. Branches slapping my face, the sound of metal clinking behind me like someone dragging a pickaxe along the ground. When I finally burst out of the woods, my truck was still there, headlights reflecting off the trees. I jumped in, locked the doors, and hit the gas. Halfway down the mountain, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There was a light behind me, a single lantern swinging in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. The smell of coal smoke lingered in my clothes and hair no matter how many times I showered. The next morning, I called the Warrenton County Sheriff's Office and told them what I'd seen. The deputy on the phone didn't even sound surprised. He just sighed and said, "You went up there, didn't you?" When I asked what he meant, he said, "That mine's been sealed 50 years, son. You didn't see a man. You saw what's left of one. Then he told me something I can't forget. He said during the rescue attempts back in '57, a group of miners had actually made it close to the surface. They found claw marks on the inside of the gate and tools piled by the exit. The men had died less than 10 feet from daylight. The rescuers swore they heard knocking from the walls days after sealing it up, but when they went back later to retrieve the bodies, the chamber was empty. No tools. No remains. Just drag marks leading upward toward the surface. I didn't go near that ridge again for months. But sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up to faint noises outside my window. At first it was just tapping, soft, rhythmic, like metal against glass. Then came the coughing. I moved apartments. Didn't help. Wherever I went, the smell of burnt coal followed. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head until one night I came home from work and found footprints in the mud outside my porch. Heavy ones like boots. They led up to my door and stopped. The next morning, when I stepped outside, I noticed something else. A small piece of blackened metal lying by the steps. It was a miner's tag, the kind they used to keep track of who was underground. It was stamped with the number 42. I still have that tag. I've tried to throw it away twice. Both times, it somehow ended up back on my kitchen counter. Last winter, I ran into an old man at the general store who said he used to work the Warrenton shaft before it collapsed. His name was Howard Tiller, must have been in his late 80s. When I mentioned what I'd seen, he looked pale and said quietly, "Don't ever go near that place again." He told me the last rescue crew to go down there, before it was sealed, reported something strange. The deeper they went, the colder it got. And from the tunnels above, not below, they heard the sound of picks striking rock. Howard said, "We always figured they dug their way out, just not where we expected." He wouldn't say more. 2 weeks ago, curiosity got the better of me. I drove out there again. Not to the shaft, just near the base of the ridge where the trail begins. It was dusk. The woods were quiet, but not silent this time, wind through the leaves, a few distant crows. Then I heard it. Clink. I froze. The sound came from above me this time, from the trees. I looked up and saw something hanging from a branch. A rusted miner's helmet swaying slowly back and forth. And just as I started backing away, a chunk of black dust fell from the branch and hit my shoulder. It wasn't dust. It was coal. The next second, the forest went dead silent again. Then came a voice, low and rough, drifting through the trees. "You're late for shift," I ran. Now I live 3 towns away, but it doesn't matter. Some nights I wake up coughing, my throat filled with that metallic taste. My hands and clothes smell faintly of soot. Once when I went to grab a drink from the fridge, I caught my reflection in the window, and for a split second I swear I saw someone standing behind me. A man in a miner's helmet, eyes black as coal, smiling. The lantern flickered in his hand. Then he was gone. People say the dead miners from Warrenton are still trying to dig their way out, that their souls got trapped, somewhere between the mine and the mountain itself. The company sealed the shaft, but maybe the mountain found another way to let them breathe. If you ever hike near that ridge and hear metal tapping, don't stop. Don't listen. Don't look up, because the sounds aren't coming from underground anymore. They're coming from the trees, and once you hear them, they'll know you're above ground, and they'll want you to join the shift. Story 6. There's a stretch of trail off the Blue Ridge Parkway that most hikers avoid, not because it's difficult, but because it's wrong. The map calls it Bear Creek Spur, but everyone local just calls it the Hollow Trail. It runs through a dense patch of woods where the air always feels colder. The wind never stops and the shadows don't move quite right. I know because I used to work search and rescue out here. And in 2018, I lost someone on that trail. His name was Mark Rivers, and to this day, I don't know exactly what happened to him. I just know that what I saw that night still follows me. And it looked human. But it wasn't. When I joined the Blue Ridge Search and Rescue Team, I thought I'd seen it all. Missing hikers, wild animal attacks, accidents. You get used to the mountains swallowing people up. But in September of 2018, we got a call that still makes my stomach twist. A group of campers near mile marker 87 reported seeing people walking through the trees at dusk. Tall, thin silhouettes that didn't carry flashlights or speak. When they shined their lights toward them, the figures froze, then vanished into the tree line. The next morning, one of the campers, a 22-year-old named Kyle Mendez, was gone. We mobilized fast. The weather forecast called for heavy fog that evening, and we wanted to find him before it set in. My team included Mark, who'd been doing this for nearly a decade, and Dana, our medic. We started around 6 p.m., hiking up the narrow trail where Kyle's group had camped. It was steep, winding, and surrounded by pines so thick the sunlight barely broke through. Mark led the way with the radio clipped to his vest. "You ever notice," he said, "how quiet these woods get after dark?" I nodded, but I didn't want to admit that it was already happening. The forest was dying around us. No crickets, no wind, just the faint hum of our gear and our boots on the dirt. We reached the camper's site just before sundown. The tent was still there, along with a small fire pit that had gone cold. The others had already been evacuated down to the ranger station for questioning, so it was just us. The first thing I noticed were the footprints, long, narrow ones circling the tent. Too narrow to belong to Kyle or his friends. Too long for an animal. Mark crouched and traced one with his glove. "That's not right," he murmured. "Maybe a trick of the mud," I said, trying to sound calm. He shook his head. "No heel marks. No tread, just smooth." We followed the prints east for a few hundred feet until they stopped abruptly at the edge of a ravine. Below, fog pooled between the trees like white smoke. That's when Dana pointed her flashlight at something hanging from a branch about 20 yards ahead. It was a jacket, a thick parka, torn at the sleeve. When I climbed up to get a closer look, I realized it had a name tag sewn into the collar. K. Mendez. There was no blood, no struggle, no other sign of him. Just the jacket swaying slowly in the breeze. As I turned back, Mark's radio crackled to life with a burst of static. We froze. Through the static, a faint voice whispered, "We're still here." Mark looked at me. "You hear that?" Before I could answer, Dana's flashlight flickered. Then the beam caught something between the trees. A tall, thin figure standing motionless about 50 feet away. At first I thought it was a man. Maybe another searcher or a lost hiker. But when I called out, it didn't respond. It just stood there. The light hit its face, and I felt my stomach drop. It didn't have one, no eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just smooth, pale skin like stretched wax. It wore a dark jacket and a hat, both too big, hanging loose like they'd belonged to someone else. The thing tilted its head slightly, as if curious. Then, without making a sound, it turned and stepped backward into the fog. I didn't move for several seconds. My mind refused to believe what I'd just seen. Mark broke the silence first. "We're heading back now." No one argued. The fog thickened fast as we started downhill. Every step felt heavier, like the air itself was pressing against us. Somewhere in the distance something clicked, a short, sharp sound, like a camera shutter. Then came another, closer this time. Click, click. I shined my flashlight to the left. Nothing. To the right. Nothing. But behind us the fog seemed to move. Shapes shifted in the white mist, long and thin. Gliding between the trees, Dana whispered, "They're following us." I turned around and caught a glimpse of movement in a silhouette crossing the trail behind Mark. It was tall. "Too tall. Mark, move!" I shouted. He spun around just as something brushed past him. I heard him gasp. Then the radio slipped from his hand and hit the ground with a crack. When I shined my light, he was gone. There was only the radio hissing softly in the dirt. "Mark!" Dana screamed. She ran forward, but I grabbed her arm. "Don't," I said. "Don't go in there." Then through the static of the fallen radio came the same whisper as before, but this time it sounded like Mark's voice. "We're still here." We backed away slowly, keeping the light trained on the fog. I could feel eyes on us. Not just one pair, but many. Then from the mist, figures began to emerge. There were 3 at first. Then 5, then more. All tall, all thin, all wearing clothes that didn't fit. One had a yellow raincoat. Another, a ranger's jacket. Another, a torn flannel shirt I recognized from Kyle's missing photo. They stood there, completely still, heads tilted in unison. None of them had faces. Just smooth, blank skin stretched tight over where their features should have been. Dana was shaking beside me, whispering, "No, no, no," over and over. One of them stepped forward. Its movements were slow but deliberate, like it was studying how to walk. The others followed, their steps completely silent on the dirt. Then one of them, the tallest, stopped right in front of me. maybe 5 feet away. I could see the outline of breath moving under its skin, like air trapped inside a balloon. It leaned close, and from where its mouth should have been, I heard it inhale sharply, a breath right next to my ear. A whisper, "We're still here." I stumbled backward and fired my flare gun into the air. The red light burst through the fog, illuminating the trees for a split second. They were gone. All of them. I don't remember much about how we got down the mountain. The next thing I knew, I was at the ranger station, sitting on a bench with a blanket around my shoulders. Dana sat across from me, pale and silent. Mark never came back. They sent teams out for a week, drones, dogs, everything. Nothing. The only thing they found was his radio, lodged in a hollow tree less than 50 yards from the trail. The report said he likely fell into a ravine during low visibility conditions. But I know what I saw. 2 days later, I went to deliver Mark's gear to his wife. She was kind, calm, too calm. When I told her where he'd gone missing, her expression changed. She said, "You shouldn't have gone on that trail." Asked why, she said Mark's grandfather used to work maintenance along the old parkway back in the 1940s. He and the other workers called that Stretch the Hollow. They'd see tall figures, wandering at dusk, faceless men in tattered work clothes. The locals believed they were spirits of those lost in a landslide that buried an entire logging crew back in 1912. Her grandfather told her something that I'll never forget. They're not ghosts. They're shells. The mountain took their faces so they could never leave. A month after the search ended, I went back to the ridge one last time. I don't know why. Maybe to convince myself I hadn't imagined it. The fog was light that day, sunlight streaming through the trees. I hiked to the same ravine where we'd found Kyle's jacket. It was gone now, probably taken as evidence, but someone had nailed something to a nearby tree. A hat. It was Mark's. The brim was bent, and the inside was lined with soot. As I stood there, a breeze moved through the woods, and with it came a sound that froze my blood. Breathing, slow, deep. From somewhere just behind me. I turned around, and for a split second I thought I saw him, Mark. Same height, same jacket, but his face was smooth. Blank. He tilted his head once, then turned and walked into the trees, his body blending into the fog until there was nothing left but silence. That night, I woke up to the sound of breathing again, not from outside, but from the corner of my room. When I turned on the lamp, no one was there. Just my coat hanging on the rack. The sleeve was wet, streaked with mud, and faintly under the sound of my own heartbeat. I heard it again. The whisper that had haunted me ever since that night. We're still here. Now, whenever hikers go missing on that stretch of the Blue Ridge, the search teams always find the same thing: a coat, a hat, or a pair of boots that didn't belong to the missing person, as if something else was trading places. If you ever find yourself hiking there and you feel someone walking behind you, don't turn around. Don't look. Don't speak, because they're still out there wandering the trails, wearing what they took from those who vanished. And if you listen closely enough, you might hear them breathe just behind your ear, whispering the same words over and over again: "We're still here." Story 7. You ever come across something that feels too old for this world? I'm not talking about ruins or fossils. I mean something that was buried on purpose. Something that was never meant to be found. That's what the locals said about the church beneath the roots. I never believed it. Growing up near the Appalachian foothills of western North Carolina, you hear all sorts of wild stories. Cursed mines, singing rivers, lights in the trees. But in 2019, a freak storm uncovered something deep in the mountains that turned one of those stories real. And after what I saw, I know now that some things get buried for a reason. I used to work as a volunteer with the Caldwell County Historical Society, mostly documenting old sites and assisting field crews when new structures or artifacts were found in the woods. It was quiet work. Long hikes, old maps, taking photos of crumbling foundations. That August, a series of violent storms swept through the Blue Ridge. Massive rainfall triggered landslides all over the area. A few days later, a logger out near Raven Hollow reported that the ground had literally opened up in one section of forest, exposing what looked like a roof. He thought it might have been an old barn or storage shed from the 1800s. The forestry department sent us to check it out. When we got there, the air still smelled of wet soil and ozone. Half the hillside had collapsed, revealing a huge pit tangled with tree roots and broken earth. And there, lodged halfway down, was the top of a church steeple, complete with a rusted iron cross. We stood there in stunned silence. How the hell did a church get buried this deep? One of the surveyors muttered. It didn't make sense. The nearest town dated back to the early 1900s, and this thing was at least 100 feet underground. We set up floodlights and safety ropes and called in a proper archaeology team. That's when things started getting strange. The first crew arrived the next morning, 5 people led by Dr. Harold Lattimore, a quiet, methodical guy in his 50s who'd spent years cataloging Civil War-era ruins. He seemed fascinated by the structure. This isn't a typical church, he told me as we looked down into the pit. See the steeple's angle? It's Gothic, maybe pre-colonial. The foundation suggests it wasn't buried by time. It was intentionally sealed. We rigged harnesses and descended into the hole. The deeper we went, the stranger it got. The air grew thick, damp and cold, smelling of mold and iron. Roots coiled around the wooden beams like skeletal fingers. The main structure was almost perfectly intact. Wooden pews sat in neat rows beneath a sagging roof. A stone altar stood at the far end, carved with strange spiral patterns I'd never seen before. Take photos, Dr. Lattimore said quietly, but don't touch anything yet. Our flashlights swept over the pews. That's when I noticed it, something dark coating the floorboards. It wasn't dirt. It was old dried wax melted into thick puddles along the aisles. Hundreds of candle stubs littered the floor, and beneath the altar was a hole, a perfectly round opening about 2 feet wide, ringed in stone. I leaned over it and felt a rush of cold air rising from below. It wasn't a tunnel, it was deeper, much deeper. That's when we heard it. A faint sound from below, not wind, not water, singing. At first I thought I was imagining it, that whispery echo you sometimes get in enclosed spaces. But the others heard it too. It was faint, low and rhythmic. Not quite a melody, not quite words either, just chanting. Dr. Lattimore's face went pale. Everyone out, he said. We climbed out fast. By the time we reached the surface, the sound had stopped. That night, he insisted we post guards around the site. No one goes in without me, he said. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. But sometime around midnight, one of the guards, Ethan, a 20-year-old student, radioed that he heard voices from the pit again. When the others checked, he was gone. His flashlight was found at the edge of the hole, still on, pointing down into the church. They called for help. By morning, the county sheriff had cordoned off the entire area. Lattimore convinced them to let his team search the interior again, claiming Ethan might have fallen through. Against better judgment, I went down with them. The wax had melted again overnight, fresh, dripping, and the chanting was louder. We followed the sound to the altar. The hole beneath it seemed darker now, pulsing with faint red light, like fire deep underground. Dr. Lattimore knelt beside it, muttering. There's no record of this chapel, he said. Nothing. It's like it was erased from history. One of the crew members, a woman named Carrie, pointed to the carvings on the altar. Those aren't Christian symbols, she whispered. They look older. Pagan, maybe. Or worse, Lattimore said. Then he did something. I'll never forget. He reached down and dropped a small rock into the hole. We waited for the sound of it hitting the bottom. Nothing. Just the echo of the chanting growing louder. And then, faintly, from deep below, something answered. It wasn't words. It was a moan. Long, hollow, almost human, Carrie screamed. The floodlights flickered. For a split second, every candle in that place, and hundreds of them, melted and dead for God knows how long, flared to life. I saw faces then. Not in the light. In the walls. Dozens of them pressed into the dirt and roots, mouths open in silent screams. Dr. Lattimore shouted for everyone to get out. As we scrambled for the ropes, the floor shifted beneath us with a deep cracking sound. A section of pews caved in, and Carrie went down with them. I grabbed the edge of the pit and looked down just in time to see her flashlight beam vanish into that black hole under the altar. The chanting turned into something else then. Laughter, not joyous laughter, mocking, cruel. I climbed like hell, barely making it to the top before the entire floor gave way. A rush of air and dust exploded from the pit, carrying that smell again, iron and rot. By the time I reached the surface, Dr. Lattimore was coughing blood. His eyes had gone glassy. He whispered something in Latin over and over until the paramedics arrived. They airlifted him out that night. The rest of us weren't allowed near the site again. A week later, I got a call from the hospital. Lattimore was awake but in bad shape. They said he'd suffered retinal damage and like he'd stared directly into a welding torch. When I visited, he was sitting up in bed, eyes bandaged, mumbling to himself. The nurse said he refused to speak English anymore, only Latin. When I walked in, he turned his head toward me even though he couldn't see. His lips trembled. They weren't praying, he whispered. They were feeding. Then he started screaming. I left before the doctor sedated him. 2 days later, he was gone, vanished. Security footage showed him walking calmly out of his room around 2:37 a.m. No one saw where he went. They never found him. A few weeks after that, the county sealed the site with concrete and declared it off limits. Officially, it was labeled a geological hazard, but I couldn't let it go. I started digging through old archives, maps, and church records. That's when I found something buried in an 1830 survey of the area. A mention of a sanctum, Petrum Chapel built by early settlers. The Latin phrase translates to holy stone. The document described it as an underground sanctuary constructed to contain the ancient voices of the earth. The church was condemned in 1842 after several members disappeared during a storm. Witnesses claimed the ground opened and swallowed them whole. It had the same coordinates as Raven Hollow. I tried to move on, but I couldn't. I kept hearing that singing. Low, distant like a hum in the back of my skull. One night, I woke to find my house shaking. The air was thick with that same smell, wet soil and iron. From outside my window came a faint, rhythmic sound, chanting. I went to the door and for a moment, I swear I saw light coming from the woods, a dull red glow, pulsing in time with the sound. When I blinked, it was gone. The next morning I found something by my porch, a piece of old wood smooth and blackened, carved with a spiral pattern, the same design from the altar. I burned it. Didn't help. The last thing I'll say is this. The state closed off Raven Hollow for good last year. Landslides, they said. But locals still report hearing music after storms, deep under the ground. And once in a while, a deer or stray dog turns up near the old logging road, eyes milky white, its ears bleeding, like it's been too close to something it shouldn't have heard. I don't go out there anymore. I don't even drive past it. But sometimes when the wind shifts just right, I still catch the faintest trace of those hymns, echoing from somewhere deep beneath the roots. And if you listen closely, under the voices you can almost hear something else whispering. Not words, but hunger. Whatever's buried down there. It wasn't meant for worship, and if the storm uncovered it once, it can happen again. Story 8. I used to laugh at the stories about Whispering Hollow Trail. Every town along the Appalachian Range has its local legend. Phantom hitchhikers, ghost trains, haunted mines. For us, it was the trail that ate time. People said hikers came back hours or even days later than they should have without realizing they'd been gone. They'd swear it was a short walk, but their friends, their families, their phones, everything said otherwise. Some claimed their watches froze. GPS stopped tracking, and a few never came back at all. It sounded like superstition, mountain folklore, until I hiked it myself. In the spring of 2021, I was studying environmental science at a small college near Boone, North Carolina. I was doing research on forest regrowth and microclimates in older sections of the Blue Ridge. My professor, Dr. Avery, suggested I document tree patterns along some of the lesser-traveled trails. That's how I found Whispering Hollow. It wasn't even listed on the main park map. I only noticed it by accident while looking at old survey records. The documents described it as a logging access path, closed sometime in the 1950s after a flood washed out several sections. When I asked a park ranger about it, he frowned. "You don't want to go there," he said. "Trail's bad. Hard to follow. And sometimes it messes with people." I laughed it off, but his tone stuck with me. 2 days later, I packed my gear, GPS, and a field notebook and drove out there anyway. The trailhead wasn't marked, just a break in the tree line off an old service road. The forest swallowed the light almost immediately. Tall hemlocks and oaks leaned over the path, their branches woven together like ribs. The air was still. No birds, no wind. Even my footsteps felt muffled. I started hiking around 10 a.m. My GPS worked fine at first. I logged soil samples, took photos, and made notes. The deeper I went, the stranger it felt. The light never changed. It stayed dim, flat, like twilight. My compass spun slowly in place, unable to settle. About 3 miles in, I found the remains of an old wooden signpost. Only a few letters were legible. Yimpering Hollow. That's when I knew I'd found it. Around noon, I stopped for lunch by a small creek. The water was crystal clear, flowing slow and steady. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. Then, as I packed up, I noticed something odd. The creek was running uphill just slightly. Enough that my brain hesitated to process it. I shook it off, told myself it was an illusion, and kept going. By 2 p.m., the GPS stopped working entirely. It just froze. Coordinates blank, signal gone. My phone lost service too. That's when the forest got quiet. I mean, completely silent. I remember stopping and realizing I couldn't hear my own breathing for a second. Like the air had thickened. Then I heard it. Faint whispering. It sounded like wind moving through the trees at first, but there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. The sound grew louder, circling me, overlapping voices. I couldn't make out words, just soft murmurs. I called out, "Hello?" Thinking maybe another hiker had wandered close. The voices stopped instantly. That's when I decided to head back. The path behind me should have been easy to follow. It wasn't. Every turn looked the same. Trees, moss, fog creeping low along the ground. The sunlight had faded, though my watch said it was barely 3:30. After about an hour of walking, I realized I was going in circles. My boot prints kept reappearing, slightly fresher each time. At one point, I swear I saw someone ahead of me on the trail. A man, tall, wearing an old flannel and carrying a pack. I shouted to him, but he didn't turn around. He just walked deeper into the woods, slow and steady. I followed him for maybe 10 minutes before he vanished between 2 trees. When I reached the spot, there was nothing there. Just the smell of rain and old wood. The whispering started again. Closer now, almost under my breath. Keep going. Not yet. I started to run. Branches tore at my arms, roots caught my boots. Every direction looked the same. I tripped, fell hard and hit my head on a rock. Everything went black. When I came to, the forest was dark. Full night. My flashlight was dead. My GPS screen flickered faintly, showing random numbers that didn't match any coordinates I'd ever seen. My head throbbed. My mouth was dry. I found my pack nearby, checked my phone, still dead. My watch said 11:14 p.m. I'd been out for maybe 8 hours, I thought. I'd make it back by morning, but when I stood up, I realized something had changed. The woods were different. The trees were thicker, older. The undergrowth was gone. Even the smell was different, damp, metallic. As I stumbled through the dark, I noticed faint lights flickering between the trees, soft, yellowish, like lanterns. I followed them, thinking maybe it was a campsite or rescue crew, but the closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The lights weren't lanterns. They were hanging in midair, perfectly still, and beneath them were shapes, figures, dozens of them, standing motionless in the glow. Some wore hiking gear, others wore tattered, old-fashioned clothes and suspenders, dresses, mining uniforms. Their faces were pale, eyes blank. I froze. One of them turned its head toward me, slow and deliberate. That's when I ran. I don't remember much after that. Just branches snapping, the whispers turning into screams, and a bright flash of white light before everything went black again. When I woke up, it was daylight. The forest was quiet again. My gear was soaked with dew. My watch stopped at 3:47 a.m. I made my way back to the service road, half stumbling, half crawling. When I reached my truck, the engine started on the first try, but the radio was dead, just static. I drove straight home. When I pulled into my driveway, my neighbor was mowing his lawn. He froze when he saw me, then ran over. "Where the hell have you been?" he said. "They've been looking for you for years." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "I've been gone maybe a day," I said. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Son, it's 2024. I didn't believe him until I saw the date on the newspaper inside my mailbox, April 12, 2024. 3 years had passed. I hadn't aged a day. At first, I thought it was a prank. Maybe I'd had an accident and lost time. But doctors ran every test imaginable. No head trauma beyond a mild concussion, no signs of dehydration, no evidence of malnutrition. I looked exactly as I had when I'd left. My ID, phone, even the food in my pack, all from 2021. My professor, Dr. Avery, was the one who confirmed it. He'd filed a missing person report after I never returned. There'd been search parties, police dogs, even helicopters. They found my car abandoned by the service road, but no trace of me. And then one morning, 3 years later to the day, I walked out of those woods and drove home like nothing happened. The media caught wind of it. Local news called it the Whispering Hollow Mystery. Reporters came from as far as Atlanta. They all asked the same question: what happened out there? But I don't have an answer. Every time I try to remember the night I disappeared, all I see is fog and the faint outline of those lights between the trees. A week after I got home, I found something strange. My GPS, the one that froze, had saved one final coordinate, E927, 82.4621. It didn't match the official map. But when I plugged it into satellite view, I saw a clearing deep in the forest shaped like a spiral. At its center was a single word carved into the ground: stay. I didn't tell anyone about that. It's been months now, and I still can't sleep through the night. Every clock I own stops at random. Watches, oven timer, even my laptop. My phone alarms go off at strange hours, always the same time, 3:47 a.m. That's the exact moment my watch stopped on the trail. Sometimes, when I walk by a mirror, I catch a flicker, a reflection that isn't quite mine. Just a half second behind, like someone walking slightly out of sync, and the whispers have started again. Faint at first, then closer. When I go outside at night, the air feels thicker and the trees seem to shift when I'm not looking. Once, I swear I saw lights again, hovering deep in the woods behind my house, pulsing gently like they were waiting. The Park Service eventually closed off Whispering Hollow entirely, citing erosion hazards. But people still sneak in. Some even post videos online. They never last long, always end abruptly with static or strange flickering lights before cutting out. 2 hikers vanished last month after posting their coordinates from the same area. And last week, I woke up to find dirt under my fingernails and pine needles on my floor. I haven't been outside. Not really, at least. I don't think I have, because sometimes when I look at my reflection, I swear I see the trees behind me. Not the ones outside my window, but the ones from the trail. The ones that whisper. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Appalachians and stumble across a faded sign that says Whispering Hollow, turn back. Don't trust your GPS. Don't check your watch. And whatever you do, don't stay after dark. Because time doesn't work right there. It stretches, it folds, it takes. And once the trail notices you, it doesn't let go. You'll come back eventually. Maybe hours later, maybe years. But you won't come back the same.